Brian Levin. He's the director of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at California State University in San Bernardino. Thank you for coming on. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Chuck.
Oh, great. Let me start with this, and that is, when you look, how is it that a self-described white nationalist who was stockpiling a cache of weapons like this was working for the federal government in a position of trust like the Coast Guard? How uncommon is that for something like that to happen?
Unfortunately, it's a bit too common for comfort. Recently, ProPublica exposed a Marine who's part of an alt-right group that went to Charlottesville. And gosh, 20-some-odd years ago, I was in the Washington Post talking about skinheads that were in the Army. So unfortunately, the military is an entity that hate mongers have targeted for some time. Now, my dad was a POW and a veteran. I want to make sure I say this. I'm not saying that most people in the military or veterans are someone who would do these kinds of things.
Right.
But in this movement, the folklore targets lone wolves, and they want to get people who have some kind of military expertise and training.
Let me ask this, though. I guess, does the Coast Guard have in place, I mean, what are the periodic background checks? Is there something that we've got to rethink on making, I mean, this is a domestic terrorist hiding in plain sight inside the federal government. You know, it's one thing for an Eric Robert Rudolph to be hiding in the woods as a domestic terrorist, a Ted Kaczynski. This guy was drawing a taxpayer-funded paycheck.
And Timothy McVeigh had a Bronze Star. Unfortunately, this movement is one that glorifies getting military people involved. Indeed, the person who killed people in Kansas at a Jewish center, during the 80s, he was trafficking in stolen military equipment, including law rockets. So this is something that I think the federal government should take a look at. We want to make sure that people in sensitive positions are not having access to heavy weaponry and be part of these extremist movements. We also saw another example right here in Southern California where ProPublica exposed another individual who had a security clearance and worked for a defense contractor.
What's the line, though, on being thought police?
You know what? Great question. The federal courts have said active membership in hate and extremist groups are something that can result in people being dismissed from sensitive positions. The problem is a lot of this jurisprudence came out when hate groups had membership cards and they met in cabins and all this other stuff. Now what we're seeing are folks who are getting radicalized on the internet. People like Bowers, who did the Pittsburgh massacre, or Dylan Roof, who were radicalized much more on the internet. That became their peer group. So it's much harder to enforce these kind of rules because the folks today are more stealth in how they operate, and they also go into places where they're not going to be exposed as much. One quick thing. Post-Charlottesville, what we saw was a diminution in the public face of these groups. These groups imploded, and now what they've created are leaner, meaner loners or individuals who join smaller local groups.
I want to ask you about the fact that should we note, is it important to notice this pattern, at least when you look at the guy who shot Steve Scalise, the synagogue shooter, this guy, and the pipe bomb guy who had the van, who sort of lived in a van and was sending pipe bombs? They all seem to fit a certain profile: older, middle-aged, white males, loners of sorts, struggling to get a job. Politics, either extreme on the left or extreme on the right, seem to give them some sense of purpose, and it warps them. Look, I know that you paint a broad brush, you got to be careful, but that does look like a pattern over a 2-year period, does it not?
Yes, and here's the interesting thing. Couple of things. First, we see a rise in white national extremists in a very crowded ideological threat matrix. And what we're seeing structurally are these folks are pointing more towards leaner, independent actors who we may not even know who they are. They have learned from being doxxed that they're going to get fired from jobs and things like that. But let me just tell you, we're seeing this across the ideological spectrum, but white nationalists are the most ascendant in this time when the threat is coming from a much smaller kind of group, or indeed loners who are getting
Brian,
radicalized on social media. And
You know, I want to ask you about, though, what does the Jussie Smollett situation, which turns out to be a hoax, and you have some activists on the right going, yes, that hate crime was a hoax. All hate, this is proof that this hate crime business is sort of overcooked and overdone or overused, whatever you want to do. What does this moment do to your work in trying to have people take this issue seriously?
It's devastating because we're living in an era where tweets and emotions overtake facts. And thank you for the opportunity to tell a national audience exactly what the heck the facts are. Over the last 3 years, we have an estimated 21,000 hate crimes. The FBI counted about 13,000 in 16 and 17. We're estimating, based on our most recent study, which will be out soon, which showed that hate crimes in 30 of the largest American cities have reached a decade high. Hate homicides have increased last year. And when we compare that to how many discovered false reports there are, less than 50 in the last 3 years. We saw 8 last year, when we estimate that there were over 7,700. So let's be real. Let's have policy responses to this. Indeed, many cities like Miami didn't report one hate crime this decade until 10 in 2018. So we have a much bigger problem with underreporting. Bureau of Justice Statistics says 54% of hate crime victims don't report. In California, Kansan Chu introduced legislation so that police will be able to better collect data on this. We need a national response. We need model policies. We need better data collection, training, and victim outreach. And this one story has eclipsed all these things when we're seeing people who are victimized whose reports don't get taken. And in some jurisdictions, for instance, Mississippi only counted one hate crime last year.
Well, that's why Jussie Smollett has to realize all the hurt and pain he has caused thousands of others who are actual victims of actual hate crimes. Brian Levin.
He did a terrible thing. Can I say one quick thing about that?
Very quick, sir.
Yeah, real briefly, we're seeing an increase not only in traditional hate violence, but also with political violence. Those places that count it say it's going up. And what we saw with election month 2016, the worst month for a hate crime since the first anniversary of 9/11 in 2002, according to research by us and our West Virginia University partners. And the day after Election Day 2016, there was a bomb plot and more hate crimes than we've seen on any day going back to 2003. And we saw a bit of a repeat election time 2018 in some of the major cities like Philly, New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles.
Brian Levin, obviously at Cal State San Bernardino, thanks very much. Appreciate your expertise on this. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.